People assume that if you come from money, nothing can really hurt you. They think wealth is a cushion that catches you no matter how far you fall. But they're wrong. When you're born into a family where money flows like oxygen, when failure isn't just disappointing but unthinkable, being labeled worthless doesn't just sting, it erases you. And that's exactly what happened to me when I was 17 years old. My name is Adrian Thornton, and before everything fell apart, I was supposed to inherit an empire. My father built Thornton Capital from nothing, turning a single successful investment into a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. My mother came from old New England money, the kind where your ancestors' names are on hospital wings and library buildings. Together, they created a life that looked perfect from the outside. The estate in Greenwich, the apartment in Manhattan, memberships at clubs most people don't even know exist. I grew up knowing I was expected to be exceptional. Not good, exceptional. My older brother Sebastian understood this instinctively. He was 2 years ahead of me at Whitlock Academy, the private boarding school where Connecticut's elite sent their children. Sebastian collected perfect grades the way other kids collected baseball cards. He was captain of the debate team, editor of the school paper, and somehow managed to make it all look effortless. Teachers spoke about him in reverent tones. My parents displayed his awards like religious artifacts. I wasn't Sebastian. I tried. God knows I tried. But something about the way my brain worked didn't fit the mold that Whitlock demanded. I could grasp concepts. Sometimes I understood the material better than anyone in my class, but tests paralyzed me. The pressure to perform, to prove I deserved my last name, created a static in my head that drowned out everything I'd learned. I'd sit there staring at exam questions I could have answered the night before, and my mind would just freeze. By junior year, my GPA hovered around 2.3. In a school where anything below 3.5 was considered substandard, I was a statistical anomaly, the kind that made admissions counselors nervous. My parents hired tutors. They brought in academic coaches. They had me tested for learning disabilities, hoping for a diagnosis that would excuse my performance. When the test came back normal, the disappointment in their eyes was worse than any failing grade. "You're just not applying yourself," my father said during one of our increasingly frequent confrontations. "Sebastian manages his time perfectly. Why can't you?" Because I'm not Sebastian, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded and promised to do better, knowing even as the words left my mouth that I wouldn't be able to keep that promise. The real turning point came in the fall of my senior year, in Mr. Damian Harding's advanced placement history class. Harding wasn't just a teacher at Whitlock, he was an institution. He'd been there for 23 years, had written 2 books on American history that were used in college courses, and served on the board of trustees. Parents fought to get their kids into his classes because a recommendation letter from Harding could open doors at Ivy League schools that even money sometimes couldn't. He was also, I would come to understand, a monster. But a very particular kind of monster. The kind who destroyed students with encouragement and smiles, who crushed futures while maintaining plausible deniability. I noticed it first with a girl named Peyton Franklin, a scholarship student from Hartford. Peyton was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that made everyone else in the room feel ordinary. Her essays were sophisticated, her class participation thoughtful and nuanced. But Harding graded her papers harshly, always finding flaws that seemed almost invisible to the rest of us. When she challenged a grade, he'd smile kindly and explain in patient tones why her analysis was superficial or her arguments derivative. I watched her confidence erode over the course of 2 months. She stopped raising her hand. Her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. By November, she'd dropped the class entirely. "Some students simply aren't cut out for advanced work," Harding announced the day after her withdrawal. "It's better they learn that now than waste time at universities where they don't belong." I should have seen the warning. I should have recognized the pattern. But I was too focused on my own struggle to survive his class. My first major paper came back with a D+ and a note requesting I see him during office hours. I went, my stomach churning with dread and shame. Harding's office was lined with books and photographs of him with various senators, governors, and university presidents. He gestured for me to sit, his expression a perfect mixture of concern and disappointment. "Adrian," he began, folding his hands on his desk, "I want to be honest with you. This paper is deeply concerning." "I can do better," I said quickly. "I'll rewrite it. It's not about rewriting." His voice was gentle, almost fatherly. "It's about capacity. Some students have the intellectual rigor for this level of work. Others don't. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations." The words hit me like a physical blow. But I understand the material. I read all the sources. Reading isn't the same as analysis. He leaned back in his chair. "Your brother Sebastian excelled in this class. Your family has a legacy of academic excellence, but legacy doesn't automatically transfer. Perhaps you're simply not built for this kind of rigorous intellectual work." I left his office feeling like I'd been hollowed out. The worst part was that some small, poisonous part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe I really was the failure everyone seemed to think I was. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that Harding had identified me as a threat before I'd even entered his classroom. Not because of my performance, but because of my last name. My family's wealth and influence represented everything he despised about Whitlock's culture of privilege. And more importantly, my presence created a problem for his carefully managed system. Harding had spent 2 decades building a machine. He identified students from the right families, old money, political connections, families who could help his career, and elevated them systematically. He wrote glowing recommendations, lobbied admissions offices, opened doors. For students like Peyton, who had intelligence but no leverage, he did the opposite. He crushed them quietly, methodically, in ways that looked like honest academic assessment. I was neither category. I had the family connections he valued, but I lacked the academic performance to justify his usual level of support. Worse, my presence in his advanced class, struggling and failing, made his recommendation pipeline less impressive. If he recommended me to Harvard or Yale based on my family name, it would dilute the value of his other recommendations. If he didn't recommend me, my parents might question his judgment or pull their substantial donations to Whitlock. So he chose a third option: destroy me so completely that my parents would blame me, not him. Make my failure so obvious, so personal, so psychological, that no one would question his assessment. And then he'd recommend Sebastian instead, maintaining his perfect record while eliminating a problematic variable. The pattern accelerated over the next 2 months. Every paper came back with harsh grades and comments that questioned not just my work, but my fundamental capacity for intellectual thought. In class, he'd ask me questions designed to expose gaps in my knowledge, then nod sadly when I stumbled through answers. "Let's have someone else try," he'd say, gently, calling on Shane Peterson or Jordan McBride, students who consistently received his highest marks and most enthusiastic recommendations. My classmates began treating me differently, some with pity, others with contempt. In an environment as competitive as Whitlock, weakness was contagious. Being associated with failure could taint your own reputation. I stopped eating lunch in the dining hall. I stopped attending social events. I'd spend hours in my dorm room, rereading chapters from our textbook, trying to figure out what I was missing, why I couldn't seem to produce work that met Harding's standards. The lowest point came in January, during parent-teacher conferences. My parents drove up from Greenwich, their faces already set in expressions of resigned disappointment. They'd seen my first semester grades. They knew what was coming. Harding greeted them warmly in his office, his voice full of regret. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, thank you for coming. I've been concerned about Adrian for some time now." My father's jaw tightened. "We've seen his grades in your class." "The grades are just a symptom of a larger issue." Harding's tone was professional, almost clinical. "Adrian lacks the intellectual discipline for rigorous academic work. I've tried various approaches, additional help, modified assignments, but there's a fundamental ceiling to his capabilities. It's not about effort. Some students simply don't have the cognitive architecture for advanced analysis." My mother's face went pale. "Are you saying our son is limited?" "I'm saying he's not suited for the kind of institution we've been preparing him for. Schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they require a specific type of analytical mind. Adrian would struggle tremendously in those environments. Frankly, it would be cruel to set him up for that kind of failure." "Sebastian succeeded in your class," my father said, his voice dangerous. "Sebastian is exceptional, but siblings often have very different capabilities. It's no one's fault, just biology." Harding spread his hands in a gesture of helpless sympathy. "I recommend considering state universities, perhaps a school with less rigorous academic demands, somewhere Adrian could find success at his own level." I sat there, silent, feeling something inside me crack and shatter. My parents didn't defend me, they didn't challenge his assessment. They just nodded slowly, accepting his judgment like a terminal diagnosis. The drive back to campus was silent. When we pulled up to my dorm, my father finally spoke. "We've invested hundreds of thousands in your education, Adrian. Tutors, test prep, this school, and this is what we get." "I'm trying. Trying isn't enough." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Sebastian is about to start at Princeton. We can't have you embarrassing this family at some third-tier state school, dragging down our reputation. We need to reconsider what kind of support makes sense going forward." That was the moment I understood. They were giving up on me. The formal withdrawal of support came 2 weeks later, delivered via a letter from my father's attorney. Effective immediately, my allowance was suspended. My trust fund access was delayed indefinitely, possibly permanently, depending on demonstrated maturity and capability. My college fund would be reassessed based on realistic academic potential and institutional fit. The letter didn't say I was being disowned. It just removed every safety net, every resource, every indication that I was still considered part of the Thornton family legacy. Sebastian called me that night. "Jesus, Adrian, what did you do?" "I failed," I said flatly. "Isn't that what everyone keeps telling me?" "Dad's seriously pissed. He's talking about you like you're a bad investment he needs to cut losses on." There was genuine worry in Sebastian's voice underneath the criticism. "You need to fix this." "How?" The word came out broken. "How do I fix being fundamentally incapable of rigorous intellectual work? That's what Harding says I am. That's what everyone believes. Harding's one teacher, Adrian, one class. He's not wrong, though." I was surprised by how calm I sounded. "Look at my transcript. Look at my test scores. Maybe I really am just limited." "Don't talk like that." Sebastian's voice sharpened. "You're not stupid. You need to figure out what's wrong and fix it, fast, before Dad makes this permanent." But I didn't know how to fix it. And over the following months, I stopped trying. I went through the motions of finishing senior year like a ghost. I showed up to classes, turned in assignments that I knew would be graded harshly, stopped speaking in discussions. When college acceptance letters arrived for my classmates, I didn't bother applying anywhere. What was the point? Shane Peterson got into Yale. Jordan McBride chose Stanford. Both had glowing recommendation letters from Harding, letters I'd accidentally seen when Shane left his acceptance packet open in the library. The praise was effusive, detailed, the kind of endorsement that could change a life trajectory. I graduated from Whitlock Academy in May, with a 2.1 GPA and no college prospects. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. Sebastian came, but left immediately after to catch a flight back to Princeton for summer session. I spent that summer in a studio apartment in Stamford that I rented with the last of my saved allowance money. No job, who would hire the Thornton family failure? No direction, no hope. I'd wake up at noon, buy cheap food with dwindling cash, and spend hours staring at the wall, trying to figure out how my life had collapsed so completely. By August, I was down to my last few $100s. I'd started researching homeless shelters, trying to understand the logistics of having absolutely nothing, when I received a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. The letter informed me that my maternal grandmother, a woman I'd met maybe 3 times in my life, had passed away 6 months earlier. Her will included a provision for me, a trust fund established before my birth, separate from any family control, that would become accessible when I turned 18. The amount was $2.3 million. I read the letter 4 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. But the law firm's phone number was real. The trust documents were legitimate. My grandmother, who'd always maintained a certain distance from my mother's marriage to a new money financier, had apparently decided I deserved my own foundation. The money arrived in my account 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. I stared at the balance on my laptop screen, feeling nothing resembling joy. Just a cold, crystallizing clarity. I could use this money to escape, to reinvent myself somewhere else, far from Whitlock and my family's disappointment, or I could use it for something else entirely. I spent a week thinking about Peyton Franklin, the way her shoulders had hunched as Harding systematically destroyed her confidence. I thought about the other students I'd noticed following similar patterns in his class. Students from the wrong backgrounds, the wrong families, the wrong demographic categories. All of them brilliant. All of them crushed under the weight of Harding's honest assessment. I started keeping notes, going through my own memories, documenting every conversation, every graded paper, every parent-teacher conference. Then I did something that would have seemed impossible months earlier. I started digging into Whitlock's own systems. The school's alumni network was extensive and well documented. Their fundraising materials bragged about placement rates at Ivy League schools. They published which teachers had the best college recommendation success rates. Harding's name appeared over and over, always attached to students from the right families. I created spreadsheets. I tracked recommendation patterns against family donation histories. I documented which students got crushed and which got elevated, mapping the data against socioeconomic backgrounds, family connections, demographic information. The pattern wasn't just obvious, it was systematic, mathematical. Harding had been running a machine for 2 decades, and Whitlock's administration had either never noticed or deliberately ignored it because his recommendation success rate made the school look good in college placement statistics. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed evidence that would be undeniable, evidence that would survive legal challenges and public scrutiny. I hired a private investigator, a former journalist who specialized in educational corruption cases. I paid him $50,000 to build an airtight case, following every ethical and legal guideline, so the evidence couldn't be dismissed on procedural grounds. He interviewed former students, gathered emails through FOIA requests, documented donation patterns, compiled statistical analyses that showed the correlation between family wealth and Harding's recommendations was far beyond what random chance could explain. It took 8 months. 8 months of living in my cheap apartment, spending my days building a case while everyone who knew me assumed I'd simply given up and disappeared. My parents never called. Sebastian checked in once every few weeks, his tone always carrying the same mixture of pity and disappointment. I let them think I was broken. let them assume the family failure had crumbled under pressure and slunk away in shame. It was easier that way. It kept them from asking questions. In April, nearly a year after my graduation from Whitlock, we had everything we needed. The investigator compiled it into a 247-page report with hundreds of supporting documents. Evidence of systematic discrimination, pay-to-play recommendation schemes, deliberate suppression of talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds, the kind of evidence that could end careers and trigger federal investigations. I sent copies to the Connecticut Department of Education, the Regional Accreditation Board, the Whitlock Board of Trustees, and, because I wanted this to be public, 5 major newspapers, including the New York Times. Then I waited. The story broke in the Times 6 weeks later. Elite boarding school teacher accused of 2-decade recommendation scheme. The article was devastating, laying out the statistical evidence and including testimony from multiple former students. Peyton Franklin was interviewed, finally able to tell her story. Harding denied everything initially. He called it a witch hunt, insisted his judgments were based purely on merit. But the numbers didn't lie. The pattern was too clear, too consistent, too mathematically improbable to be anything but intentional. Whitlock's board placed him on administrative leave within days. The Connecticut DOE opened a formal investigation. Other former students came forward with similar stories. The Accreditation Board began a comprehensive review of the school's admission and recommendation practices. 3 months later, Damian Harding resigned in disgrace. His teaching license was suspended pending investigation. The books he'd written were quietly pulled from university reading lists. The board memberships vanished. His career, built over 23 years, collapsed in less than a season. I watched it happen from my apartment in Stamford, feeling nothing like satisfaction, just a cold, empty validation. I'd been right. The system had been rigged, and I'd torn it down methodically, piece by piece, using the skills everyone insisted I didn't have. But the victory felt hollow, because while I'd destroyed Harding's machine, I couldn't undo what it had done to me. Couldn't erase the months of being told I was fundamentally limited. Couldn't restore the relationship with my parents, who still hadn't called, who still considered me a failure, who had no idea what I'd just accomplished. I didn't tell them, didn't tell anyone. The investigator knew, but he was bound by confidentiality agreements. The newspapers never identified who'd triggered the investigation, just cited a comprehensive anonymous report submitted to oversight authorities. I wanted it that way, because this wasn't about getting credit or changing my family's opinion of me. That bridge had burned completely. This was about making sure Harding could never do to another student what he'd done to Peyton, to me, to dozens of others. With that done, I took what remained of my grandmother's money, about $1.8 million after investigation costs and living expenses, and disappeared completely. I moved to Austin, Texas, chose it randomly off a map because it was growing fast, full of opportunity, far from Connecticut and everything I'd known. I cut off contact with my family entirely, changed my phone number, closed my email accounts, made sure there was no way for them to find me even if they bothered looking. Sebastian tried for a while, left voicemails asking where I was, if I was okay, saying Mom was starting to worry. But his efforts were half-hearted, more obligation than genuine concern. When I didn't respond, he stopped trying. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. For the first time in my life, no one was watching me, judging me, expecting me to live up to or down to some predetermined standard. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like drowning. I spent the first month in Austin doing nothing, living in a cheap apartment near the university, ordering takeout, lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The money in my account felt like a weight rather than an opportunity. I'd used it to destroy Harding, but now what? Where did someone like me go after burning down the only world they'd ever known? The answer came from an unexpected source: boredom. I was sitting in a coffee shop in late September, watching UT students cluster around tables with laptops and textbooks, when I overheard two of them discussing a business idea. They were excited, animated, talking over each other about an app that would help students find affordable housing near campus. The technical details were simple, basically a Craigslist filter with better verification, but they had no idea how to build it. "We need a developer," one of them said. "But everyone wants equity, and we don't even know if this will work." "What about that coding boot camp?" the other suggested. "Maybe someone there could help." Something clicked in my brain. Not inspiration, more like recognition. I'd spent my entire life being told what I couldn't do, what I wasn't capable of. But no one had ever actually asked me what I could do, what I might be good at if I got to choose the field myself. I went home and started researching coding boot camps. Found one in Austin that offered intensive 12-week programs in web development. The cost was $12,000. The time commitment was brutal, 60 hours a week minimum. I signed up that night. The boot camp was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but in a completely different way than Whitlock had been hard. This was hard because I was learning genuinely new skills, building things from scratch, solving problems that didn't have predetermined right answers that I could somehow fail to find. More importantly, no one knew who I was. No one knew about my GPA or my family or my history of academic failure. They just cared whether I could write code that worked, whether I could debug problems, contribute to team projects, meet deadlines. And I could. Not easily, not perfectly, but I could do it. I could sit with a problem for hours, breaking it down into smaller pieces, testing solutions, learning from failures. Without the weight of expectations and legacy and teachers who'd already decided I was limited, I could actually think. I finished the boot camp in December, near the top of my cohort. Not the very best. There were students with computer science backgrounds who had massive head starts, but solidly competent, employable. I got my first job in January, building websites for a small digital marketing agency. The pay was $45,000 a year, nothing compared to my family's wealth, but I'd earned it myself. No legacy, no connections, just skills I'd built from nothing. I was 20 years old and finally good at something. Over the next 2 years, I worked obsessively. I took every project the agency offered, stayed late solving problems no one else wanted to touch, taught myself new frameworks and languages on weekends. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. My family had no idea what I was doing, and I intended to keep it that way. I was just building, creating something that was mine. By year 2, I was leading major client projects. By year 3, the agency promoted me to senior developer. My salary hit $85,000, then $110,000. I was good at this, really, genuinely good at it. But I'd also started noticing inefficiencies in how the agency operated. We'd spend weeks building custom solutions for clients when better, faster options existed. We'd reinvent the wheel over and over because we didn't have good internal systems for reusing code. I started building tools on the side, templates and frameworks that could be customized for different clients, cutting development time by 60%. I showed them to my boss, thinking he'd be excited about the efficiency gains. Instead, he looked worried. "If we can build sites this fast, clients will expect cheaper quotes. We'll make less money." "But we could take on 3 times as many clients," I argued. "We don't have the sales capacity for that." He shook his head. "This is good work, Adrian, but it doesn't fit our business model. We charge for hours, reducing hours, reduces revenue. I understood then that I was working in the wrong structure. The agency model incentivized slowness, complexity, inefficiency. They had no interest in innovation that would reduce billable hours. I took my tools and quit. I was 23 years old with $200,000 in savings. My salary plus what remained from my grandmother's money, carefully invested and grown. I used $100,000 to start my own company, Thornton Digital Solutions. The irony of keeping my family name wasn't lost on me, but it was my name too. And I wanted to prove that a Thornton could build something real, something earned, something that had nothing to do with inherited wealth or family connections. The business model was simple. I'd offer website development at half the market rate, but with triple the speed. Small businesses and startups that couldn't afford traditional agencies would get professional quality sites. I'd make less per project, but could handle volume. For the first 6 months, I worked 16-hour days, often sleeping in my office, a converted bedroom in a shared workspace. I did everything: coding, design, client communications, accounting, marketing. Every project had to be perfect because I couldn't afford reputation damage. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a nonprofit called Access Now that provided educational resources to underprivileged kids. Their executive director, a woman named Chloe Sutton, contacted me through the website. "We've been quoted $50,000 for a website redesign," she said on our introductory call. "Your rates say you can do it for $20,000. That seems unlikely." "I can show you my portfolio," I offered. "I've looked at it. The work is good." She paused. "Too good for these prices. What's the catch?" "No catch. I'm just more efficient than traditional agencies. I've built frameworks that cut development time significantly. And you're not going to disappear halfway through the project because you realize you can't actually deliver at this price?" Something in her voice told me she'd been burned before. "I'll put completion guarantees in the contract," I said. "If I don't deliver, you don't pay." She was quiet for a moment. "Why do you care about nonprofits? Most developers chase corporate clients." I almost deflected, gave some business-focused answer about diversifying client base. But something made me honest. Because I know what it's like when no one gives you a chance. When the system decides you don't deserve access. "What do you mean?" And there, in that moment, I told her. Not everything. Not about my family or Harding or Whitlock. But about being written off. Told I didn't have what it takes. Watching opportunities go to people who fit the right profile while others got shut out. Chloe was quiet when I finished. Then, "We'll need the website to handle resource libraries, donation processing, and volunteer coordination. Can you build that?" "Yes." "Then we have a deal?" "But Adrian, I'm going to be watching this project very carefully. Access Now serves kids who've been failed by every system they've encountered. I'm not going to let them down by working with someone unreliable." "Understood." I built them the best website I was capable of creating. Then I built it better. I added features they hadn't requested. Tools for tracking student progress. Automated reporting for grant applications. Mobile optimization that would work on the cheapest phones. I delivered it 2 weeks early. Chloe called me the day after launch. "This is remarkable. This is better than organizations with 10 times our budget. I'm glad it works for you." "We can't pay you more than the contract amount," she said. "But I'm going to tell every nonprofit director I know about you. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay." Over the next year, Access Now's referral turned into 15 more nonprofit clients. Word spread through the social impact sector. My calendar filled with organizations doing work I actually cared about. Education access, poverty relief, criminal justice reform. The nonprofit work didn't pay as much as corporate clients, but it was steady, meaningful, and generated a reputation for reliability and quality. Within 2 years, Thornton Digital Solutions had 12 full-time employees and revenue approaching $2 million annually. I was 25 years old and running a successful business. By objective measures, I'd succeeded beyond what anyone at Whitlock, including my family, had thought possible for me. But success felt strange, hollow in ways I couldn't quite articulate. I'd built this company, built this life, but I'd done it alone. Completely isolated from everyone who'd known me before. I had employees, clients, professional relationships, but no friends, no real connections, just work. The isolation was protective. I understood that intellectually. After what had happened with Harding, with my family, trusting people felt dangerous. Better to stay focused, stay controlled, stay completely self-sufficient. Then I met Madison Keller. Access Now was hosting a fundraising event in downtown Austin, and Chloe had invited me. "You've done so much for us," she'd said. "You should see the work up close." I almost declined. Networking events made my skin crawl. Too much superficial conversation, too many people performing success. But Chloe had been my first real client, the one who'd taken a chance when no one else would. I owed her at least an appearance. The event was held in a renovated warehouse, full of donors and volunteers and families who benefited from Access Now's programs. Chloe was everywhere at once, greeting people, directing caterers, fixing technical problems with the presentation system. I was standing awkwardly near the bar when a woman approached me. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wore a dress that looked like it had come from Target rather than the boutiques most of the crowd favored. "You're Adrian Thornton," she said, not a question. "Yes. I work the resource center at the East Side location. Your website is the only reason I can do my job." She extended her hand. "Madison Keller." Her handshake was firm, direct. "The volunteer coordination portal," she continued, "saves me probably 20 hours a week. Before you built that, I was tracking everything in spreadsheets and group texts. It was chaos. I'm glad it helps." "Helps?" She laughed. It was a genuine sound, unpolished. "It's the difference between functioning and drowning. We get 300 volunteers a month. Without your system, I'd lose my mind." "What do you do at the resource center?" "Everything. Tutoring coordination, after-school programs, college prep workshops. Basically, I try to give kids the kind of support I never had access to." She caught herself. "Sorry, that probably sounds presumptuous. You don't know anything about me." "Tell me," I said, surprising myself. Madison looked at me carefully, like she was deciding whether I was genuinely interested or just being polite. Something in my expression must have convinced her. "I grew up in a trailer park outside Fort Worth," she began. "Single mom, 3 kids, no money. I was good at school, really good, but there was no pathway from where I was to college. No one to write recommendations, no one to help with applications, no money for test prep or application fees. The school counselor told me I should consider cosmetology school because I had a realistic understanding of my options. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me harder than it should have. I knew exactly what that felt like, being told your limitations by someone in authority, having your potential dismissed as delusion. "How'd you end up here?" I asked. "Spite, mostly." She smiled, but there was steel underneath. "I worked 3 jobs, saved money, applied to community college, took 6 years to finish my bachelor's degree because I could only afford 1 or 2 classes at a time. Graduated with a degree in education and $40,000 in debt. No school district would hire me because I didn't have the right student teaching placements. Couldn't afford to do unpaid work for a semester. So I ended up at Access Now, working with kids who remind me of who I was, making sure someone actually believes in them." "That counselor was an idiot," I said quietly. Madison laughed again, genuinely surprised. "Most people give me the inspiration story response. You know, look how far you've come, what an amazing journey. You just went straight to calling out the person who tried to stop me. Because that's what matters, not the triumph over adversity narrative. The fact that someone with authority tried to destroy your future based on where you came from. She studied me for a long moment. You're not like the other donors here. I'm not a donor, I just built the website. Chloe said you give us massive discounts. That's donating, just through your work instead of a check. She tilted her head. Why do you do that? I could have deflected, should have deflected. But something about Madison's directness, her complete lack of performance, made me honest. Because I was written off too, I said. Different circumstances, but the same mechanism. Someone decided I didn't deserve access, didn't have potential, should accept my limitations and get out of the way. What happened? I proved them wrong, but it took years, and I was lucky. I had resources most people don't. I can't fix the whole system, but I can build tools that make it slightly less impossible for organizations trying to help. Madison was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months. We talked for another 2 hours. Not networking conversation, real conversation. About systems that crush people, about the violence of low expectations, about the specific ways institutional gatekeepers destroy futures while maintaining plausible deniability. She told me about students she'd worked with, kids with devastating intelligence who'd been tracked into remedial classes because they lived in the wrong zip code. I told her about Peyton Franklin, about the machine Harding had built, about spending months documenting a system everyone else pretended didn't exist. I didn't tell her about my family. Didn't mention wealth or Greenwich or the inheritance I'd used to destroy Harding's career. But I told her enough that she understood. You should come by the resource center, Madison said as the event wound down. See the work in person. These kids would benefit from meeting someone who actually understands what they're up against. I surprised myself by agreeing. Over the following months, I started volunteering at the East Side Resource Center one afternoon a week, teaching basic coding to high school students, helping with college application essays, just being present as someone who'd come from a place of being dismissed and found a way through. The kids were remarkable, smart, focused, hungry for opportunities that should have been automatic but weren't. I watched Madison work with them and saw something I'd never encountered before. Someone who genuinely believed in people without needing them to perform or prove themselves first. She didn't grade her belief based on test scores or family background. She just saw potential and created space for it to develop. It was the complete opposite of how I'd experienced education. We started getting coffee after my volunteer sessions. Then dinner, then long walks through East Austin, talking about everything and nothing. Madison had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like interrogation, just genuine curiosity about how I thought, what I cared about, why I'd made the choices I had. I found myself telling her things I'd never told anyone, about the isolation of rebuilding myself alone, about the strange emptiness of success when no one you used to know sees it, about the way trust felt dangerous after being so completely betrayed by people who were supposed to guide and protect you. She listened without trying to fix anything, without offering platitudes, just listened and understood. 6 months after we met, sitting on her apartment balcony at 2 a.m, she asked the question I'd been dreading. What about your family? I'd managed to avoid this topic through careful deflection, but Madison was too observant to miss that I never mentioned parents, siblings, childhood holidays. We're not in contact, I said carefully. Why? They gave up on me, decided I wasn't worth their investment. When I needed support, they withdrew it completely. The words came out flat, emotionless, so I cut them off, permanently. Do they know what you've built? This company, this life? No. Don't. You want them to know? Don't you want them to see they were wrong about you? I considered the question seriously. Did I want that? Some part of me, the 17-year-old kid sitting in Harding's office being told he lacked cognitive architecture, wanted vindication desperately. Wanted to walk into my father's office in Greenwich and show him exactly how wrong he'd been. But a larger part, the part that had spent 6 years building something real, knew the truth. Their recognition wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't erase the damage, wouldn't restore what had been broken. No, I said finally, I don't want them to know, because their opinion doesn't matter anymore. I'm not the same person they wrote off, and they're not the people I need approval from. Madison was quiet for a long time, then, that's not closure, that's amputation. Maybe, but it's also survival. They taught me that love is conditional, that support comes with strings, that you're only valuable if you meet arbitrary standards. I can't unlearn that. Can't trust that kind of relationship again. Even though it means you're alone? I'm not alone right now. She looked at me, and something shifted in her expression. No, you're not. We started dating officially after that conversation. It felt strange, good strange, but strange, to share my life with someone after years of careful isolation. Madison didn't try to fix me or push me to reconcile with my family. She just existed beside me, creating space where I didn't have to perform or prove anything. The company continued growing. By my 28th birthday, Thornton Digital Solutions had 40 employees and revenue exceeding $15 million annually. We'd expanded beyond website development into custom software solutions, mobile apps, enterprise platforms. I'd built a reputation for solving problems other development shops considered impossible. More importantly, 30% of our revenue came from nonprofit clients, all billed at cost or below. It was my way of ensuring that organizations doing critical work, education access, poverty relief, healthcare outreach, had the technology they needed even when they couldn't afford market rates. Madison was there for all of it, watching the growth with a mixture of pride and concern. You work too much, she'd say, finding me at my desk at midnight. Building something sustainable takes time. Building something sustainable also requires you to exist outside work. When's the last time you took a day off? I couldn't remember. Work was safe. Work was controllable. Work was something I could succeed at through pure effort and competence. I'll slow down soon, I'd promise, meaning it, but never quite following through. At 29, I sold a piece of the company to a private equity firm for $50 million. Not full acquisition, I retained majority control, but enough that my paper net worth crossed into 9 figures. I was, by any measure, extraordinarily successful. The money felt abstract. I lived in the same apartment I'd rented 5 years earlier, drove a 7-year-old Honda, spent most of my time working or volunteering. The only luxury I allowed myself was the satisfaction of writing checks to organizations like Access Now, funding expansions and programs that created pathways for kids who'd been written off. It was enough. It had to be enough. Then, one afternoon in December, my phone rang with a Connecticut area code I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something, curiosity maybe, or a dark instinct, made me pick up. Adrian? The voice was older than I remembered, but unmistakable. My father. I should have hung up immediately, should have blocked the number and moved on. Instead, I just sat there silent. Adrian, I know you're there. I can hear you breathing. A pause. We need to talk. No, we don't. I know you're angry. I'm not angry. It was true. I felt nothing but a distant, cold curiosity. I just have nothing to say to you. Sebastian told me you're in Austin, that you've started a business. Of course, Sebastian had told him. My brother's attempts to find me had eventually succeeded. Probably hired a private investigator. I'd known it was only a matter of time. Your mother and I would like to see you. To talk about what? How you decided I was a bad investment and cut me off. How you believed a corrupt teacher over your own son. How you wrote me off as fundamentally limited and never looked back. My father's voice hardened. You were failing everything. You showed no initiative, no drive. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to be my parents, not my board of directors conducting performance reviews. We tried to help you, spent a fortune on tutors, counselors. You tried to make me into Sebastian. When I couldn't be him, you gave up. I kept my voice level, clinical. But that's all ancient history now. I don't need your help, don't want your money, don't require your approval. We're done. Adrian, you can't just... I hung up. Madison found me an hour later, still sitting in my office, staring at the phone. What happened? She asked, reading my expression. I told her about the call, about my father's attempt at contact, his justifications, his assumption that I'd want to reconnect now that I'd proven myself. Are you going to talk to them? Madison asked carefully. No. Even though you've succeeded beyond anything they thought possible? Especially because of that. I looked at her. They didn't believe in me when belief mattered. When I needed support and guidance, they withdrew it completely. Now that I've succeeded despite them, they want back in? That's not love. That's just credit-seeking. What if they genuinely want to make amends? Then they can live with the consequences of their choices, the same way I had to. There was no heat in my voice, just certainty. I don't forgive them, and I don't need their validation. The life I've built is mine. They have no part in it. Madison nodded slowly. She didn't agree. I could see the concern in her eyes, but she respected my decision. My father called 3 more times over the following weeks. I blocked his number after the 3rd attempt. Sebastian sent emails that I deleted without reading. My mother, I learned through a mutual LinkedIn connection, had tried to friend me on Facebook. I ignored all of it. I was 30 years old, running a company worth over $200 million, and I had nothing to prove to the people who'd given up on me. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like necessary distance, like scar tissue that had formed over a wound that would never fully heal. The real turning point came a year later, at an Access Now gala. The organization had grown substantially, largely funded by donations from my company and my personal foundation. They were celebrating the opening of their 4th resource center, this one in a low-income neighborhood in San Antonio. Chloe gave a speech about impact, about the hundreds of kids who'd received college prep support, tutoring, mentorship, about breaking cycles of poverty through education access. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She called me to the stage. Our work wouldn't be possible without partners who genuinely care about creating pathways for kids the system has ignored, she said. Adrian Thornton and his company have donated not just money, but time, expertise, and genuine commitment. Adrian, would you say a few words? I hate public speaking, always have. But I walked to the podium, looking out at a room full of donors, volunteers, and families who'd benefited from the programs. I'm not good at speeches, I began, but I understand what Access Now does because I've lived the other side of it. I know what it's like to be written off by people in authority, to be told, you're limited, incapable, that you should accept your place and stop reaching for opportunities you don't deserve. The room was silent. A teacher once told me I lacked the cognitive architecture for rigorous intellectual work, that I should aim lower, accept my limitations. My own family believed him, withdrew their support, decided I wasn't worth the investment. I saw Madison in the audience, her expression worried, but I kept going. I proved them wrong, but only because I got lucky, because I had resources most people don't have access to. The kids Access Now serves don't get those second chances. They get written off and stay written off unless someone intervenes, unless someone creates the pathways that should exist automatically, but don't. I paused, collecting my thoughts. I can't fix the whole system, can't make it fair or just or equitable, but I can make sure organizations like this one have the resources to fight back, to create spaces where potential matters, more than zip codes, where kids get believed in before they have to prove themselves. That's what Access Now does. That's why I'll keep supporting this work for as long as I'm able. The applause was polite, warm, but as I left the stage, I realized I'd said too much, revealed too much. People would have questions now, would want to know the full story. Madison caught up with me in the hallway. That was brave. That was stupid. Now everyone's going to what? Know that you're human? That you've experienced the same kinds of systematic rejection their kids face? She touched my arm gently. Adrian, you just gave those families hope. Showed them that someone who understands their struggle is fighting for their kids. That's not stupid. That's powerful. Maybe she was right. But it felt like exposure. Like I'd opened a door I'd kept carefully locked for years. The questions came, just as I'd expected. Donors wanting to know more about my background, reporters asking for interviews. I declined most of them, maintained my privacy, but I did agree to one profile in the Austin Business Journal, mostly because they wanted to focus on the nonprofit work rather than my personal story. The article ran in March, titled, Tech Entrepreneur's Mission, Making Opportunity Universal. It covered Thornton Digital Solutions' growth, our nonprofit focus, my commitment to education access. The personal details were minimal, just enough to explain my motivation without turning it into trauma porn. The article reached Connecticut. I knew this because Sebastian called my business line, somehow bypassing the blocks on my personal number. Adrian, I read the article, he said when I picked up, not identifying himself. He didn't need to. I'd know my brother's voice anywhere. What you've built is incredible. What do you want, Sebastian? Dad saw it too. He doesn't know how to say this, but he's proud. He wants to talk. No. Adrian, come on, it's, been over a decade. You've proven everyone wrong. You've succeeded beyond. I didn't do any of this to prove anything to anyone in that family. I did it because it needed to be done, because I had resources and skills, and I chose to use them for something meaningful. My voice stayed level. Dad isn't proud. He's just recalculating my value now that I've demonstrated market success. That's not pride. That's investment analysis. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I intended. What about abandoning your son because a corrupt teacher convinced you he was defective? What about withdrawing all support from an 18-year-old who'd been systematically crushed? Was that fair? We made mistakes. You made choices that taught me I was only valuable if I met your standards. That love was conditional on performance. I've spent a decade unlearning that damage. I'm not interested in relearning it. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Mom asks about you all the time. Then she can live with the consequences of her choices. Adrian, I hung up. Madison found me later that evening, working late as usual. She didn't say anything, just sat in the chair across from my desk and waited. Sebastian called, I finally said. I figured. She studied my face. What did he want? Reconciliation, or what he thinks reconciliation looks like. My father seeing the Business Journal article and deciding I'm worth talking to again, now that I've proven my market value. And you said no. Of course I said no. What did he expect? That I'd just forget 12 years of silence? That success would magically heal the damage they caused? I don't think he expected anything, Madison said gently. I think he's reaching out because he misses his brother and doesn't know how to bridge the gap. That's not my responsibility. I didn't create the gap. No, but you're the only one who can decide whether it ever closes. I looked at her, feeling suddenly defensive. You think I should talk to them, forgive them. I think you should do whatever you need to do to heal. If that's maintaining distance, fine. But Adrian, This anger, this absolute refusal to even consider contact. It's not protective anymore. It's just another cage you've built for yourself. They wrote me off when I was 17 and desperate, I said quietly. They believed a corrupt teacher over their own son. They withdrew support when I needed it most. How do I forgive that? I don't know. Maybe you don't. Maybe you can't. Madison leaned forward. But you've spent 12 years proving you don't need them. You've built an incredible life, helped thousands of people, created something meaningful from nothing. Maybe it's time to stop proving and start living. Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Because she was right, I had built an incredible life. Thornton Digital Solutions employed over 100 people, generated enormous revenue, and donated millions to causes I cared about. My personal foundation funded educational access programs across 3 states. I had Madison, work I believed in, the respect of people who mattered to me. But I'd built all of it in opposition to my family, in defiance of their judgment. Every success was proof they'd been wrong, evidence that I was better than they'd believed. What would my life look like if I stopped needing to prove that? I didn't have an answer. Didn't know if I'd ever have an answer. Over the following year, I focused on expansion. Thornton Digital Solutions opened offices in 3 new cities. My foundation partnered with Access Now and similar organizations to create a nationwide network of resource centers. We built technology platforms that made educational support scalable, replicable, accessible to kids who'd never had those opportunities before. The work was meaningful, impactful, exactly what I'd wanted to create, but Madison's question stayed with me. When would I stop proving and start living? The answer came unexpectedly on a random Tuesday in November. I was at the East Side Resource Center, teaching a coding workshop to high school juniors. One of the students, a quiet kid named Quentin, who reminded me painfully of my younger self, stayed after class. Mr. Thornton? His voice was hesitant. Can I ask you something? Of course. Ms. Keller said you went through something hard in high school, that people told you that you couldn't do stuff. That's right. Did it ever stop hurting, or do you just get better at ignoring it? The question was so raw, so honest, that I couldn't give him a polished answer. It doesn't stop hurting, I said finally. But it changes, becomes part of your foundation instead of an active wound. You learn to build on top of it. My counselor says I should consider trade school. Says college probably isn't realistic for someone with my background. Quentin's jaw tightened. But I want to study engineering. I'm good at math. Your counselor's wrong, I interrupted. Not about trade school being valuable. It absolutely is for people who want that path. But about what's realistic for you. Only you get to decide that. But what if they're right? What if I try and fail and just prove they were right all along? I looked at this kid, seeing myself at 17, seeing Peyton Franklin, seeing everyone who'd been crushed by someone in authority who decided potential didn't matter as much as demographics. Then you fail and try again, I said. But you don't let someone else's limited imagination define your ceiling. I had teachers, parents, guidance counselors all tell me I was limited. I believed them for a while. That belief almost destroyed me. What changed? I got angry enough to stop believing them. And then I got disciplined enough to prove them wrong methodically. But here's the thing. Proving them wrong didn't actually fix anything. Success didn't heal the damage they caused. It just gave me resources to build a different kind of life. Quentin absorbed this silently. Do you regret it? Proving them wrong instead of just moving on? It was a better question than he probably realized. Did I regret spending 12 years in opposition mode, building everything in defiance of my family's judgment? I don't know, I admitted, but I know I'd regret letting their judgment be the final word. So go study engineering. Work your ass off. And if people tell you it's unrealistic, let that fuel you instead of stop you." He nodded slowly, then left. I sat there in the empty classroom, thinking about what I'd just said. I'd told Quentin that success didn't heal the damage, and it was true. I'd proven my family wrong 1,000 times over, and it hadn't restored what they'd broken, hadn't made me whole. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that I'd survived, built something meaningful, and created pathways for others who'd face similar dismissal. Maybe that was enough. I went home to find Madison cooking dinner in our apartment. We'd moved in together 6 months earlier, a decision that terrified me but turned out to be the best choice I'd made in years. "You look thoughtful," she observed, handing me a glass of wine. Kid at the resource center asked if proving people wrong ever stops hurting. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that it doesn't heal anything, just gives you resources to build something different." Madison set down her spatula and turned to face me fully. "Adrian, what do you need to heal?" It was a simple question, a devastating question. "I don't know," I said honestly. I thought success would do it. Thought building this company, helping these kids, proving I wasn't limited, I thought that would fix it. But there's still this emptiness, this sense that something fundamental is missing. "Connection," Madison said gently. "Real connection that isn't based on what you can do or what you've built. Connection that exists even when you're not performing. I have that with you." "You do, but Adrian, I think you need it with your family too. Or at least, you need to find out whether it's possible." I started to object, to explain why that was impossible. But she raised a hand. "I'm not saying forgive them. I'm not saying pretend the damage didn't happen. I'm saying maybe, just maybe, you deserve to know whether there's anything worth salvaging. Because right now, you're living in opposition. And opposition is exhausting, even when you're winning." Her words settled over me like weight and relief simultaneously. She was right. Of course she was right. I'd spent 12 years proving my family wrong, building success they'd never expected, creating a life they had no part in. It was satisfying in theory, but in practice it meant I was still defined by their judgment, just in reverse. I didn't contact them, not immediately. Instead, I did something I'd never allowed myself to do. I looked them up. Really looked. Not the careful avoidance I'd practiced for a decade. My father's hedge fund had weathered the financial crisis and continued growing. Sebastian was now a partner there, following the exact trajectory everyone had always expected. My mother served on charity boards, maintained the family's social position. From the outside, they looked exactly the same as they had when I'd left. Successful, established, secure in their position. But then I found an interview my father had given to the Financial Times 2 years earlier. Most of it was standard business analysis, market predictions, investment philosophy. But near the end, the interviewer asked about his children. "My older son, Sebastian, has been an incredible asset to the firm," my father said. Then, after a pause, "My younger son and I are estranged. It's my greatest regret." The words were brief, careful, but they were there. I showed the article to Madison that evening. "He's not wrong," she said after reading. "It should be his greatest regret. But does that matter? Does regret fix anything? No, but it might be a starting point." I thought about that for weeks, about whether my father's regret, if it was genuine and not just performance for a journalist, meant anything, whether it created any obligation or opportunity. Finally, in February, I sent an email. Not to my father directly, I wasn't ready for that, but to Sebastian, whose contact information I still had buried in old files. The message was brief. "Sebastian, I saw Dad's FT interview. If he wants to talk, he can reach me at this email address. But I need to be clear. I'm not interested in reconciliation if it means pretending the past didn't happen. If he can acknowledge what he did and why it was wrong, I'm willing to have a conversation. If not, we stay where we are. Adrian. Sebastian responded within an hour. He'll want to talk. I'll give him your email. Thank you for this. My father's email arrived 3 days later. It was long, over 2,000 words, and I read it with my hands shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify his decision to withdraw support. Instead, he laid out, point by point, the mistakes he'd made, how he'd confused perfection with potential, how he'd let an authority figure's assessment override his own judgment, how he'd treated parenting like portfolio management and made decisions based on short-term performance metrics rather than long-term investment in his son. I was wrong, he wrote, not just about your capabilities, though obviously I was catastrophically wrong about that, but about what it means to be a father. I prioritized reputation over relationship. I valued achievement over character, and when you struggled, I treated it as a failure of your effort rather than a failure of my support. He acknowledged that his regret didn't erase the damage. That saying sorry couldn't undo 12 years of silence. But he wanted me to know that he thought about it constantly, that seeing what I'd built made him realize how completely he'd misunderstood who I was and what I was capable of. You succeeded despite me, not because of me, he concluded. I can't change that. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to know the person you've become. Not to take credit or claim any part in your success, but simply because you're my son and I miss you. I read the email 5 times, showed it to Madison, read it again. What do you think? I asked her. I think that's the most honest thing your father has probably ever written, she said. But the question isn't what I think, it's what you need. What did I need? I needed to know whether healing was possible, whether the damage was permanent, or if there was some path forward that didn't require me to either forgive completely or maintain absolute separation. I needed to know if connection with my family could exist without erasing what they'd done, or pretending I hadn't changed fundamentally because of it. I replied 2 days later, Dad, your email was honest. I appreciate that. But I need you to understand that I'm not the son you remember. The last 12 years changed me in ways I can't undo. I built this life in opposition to your judgment, and that's shaped everything about how I think, how I trust, how I relate to success. I don't know if we can have a relationship that accounts for all of that, but I'm willing to find out. I'll be in New York for a conference in April. We can meet then, if you want. Adrian. His response was immediate. I want. Tell me when and where. The meeting happened on a rainy Tuesday in Manhattan, at a quiet restaurant in Midtown. I arrived early, sitting at a corner table where I could see the door. My hands were steady. I'd prepared for this, rehearsed what I'd say, built emotional armor to protect against whatever might happen. Then my father walked in, and all that preparation evaporated. He looked older, much older than 12 years should account for. His hair had gone fully gray, his shoulders slightly stooped. He saw me and stopped, just for a moment. Before walking to the table, we shook hands, awkward, formal. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sitting down. I almost didn't. I know. He looked at me directly, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Uncertainty. My father, who'd built a multi-billion-dollar firm through confident decision-making, looked genuinely uncertain. We ordered food neither of us would eat, made small talk about nothing. Then finally, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Tell me about your company. Sebastian showed me the Business Journal article, but I'd like to hear it from you. So I told him about the boot camp, the first clients, the decision to focus on nonprofit work, about building Thornton Digital Solutions from nothing, about the foundation, about Access Now and Madison and the kids I was trying to help. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You built exactly the kind of thing I always wanted to build, he said finally. Something that matters beyond profit margins. Something that creates real impact. Your hedge fund creates plenty of impact, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It creates returns for investors. That's not the same thing, he paused. I spent decades optimizing for money and status. Built something successful but not meaningful. You built both. I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished. Don't. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't be proud. You have no claim to this. You didn't support it, didn't enable it, didn't believe it was possible. I know. Do you? Because it feels like you're trying to take credit by osmosis. Like my success somehow reflects on you because we share DNA. My father's face tightened, but he didn't get defensive. You're right. I'm sorry. What I meant was, I'm proud of you as a person, separate from any parental role I failed to fulfill. You're exceptional in ways I never gave you room to demonstrate. Because you were too busy comparing me to Sebastian and finding me deficient. Yes. He met my eyes. I was. And that was one of the worst mistakes of my life. The conversation went on for 2 hours. We didn't resolve anything. Couldn't resolve 12 years of damage in a single lunch. But we talked honestly. About his failures as a father. About my anger and isolation. About whether any kind of relationship was possible going forward. I don't forgive you, I said as we were leaving. I don't know if I ever will. What you did, writing me off, withdrawing support when I was 17 and desperate, that changed me permanently, made trust almost impossible. I can't just forget that. I don't expect you to, my father said. I'd like the chance to know you, even if that relationship looks nothing like what fathers and sons usually have. Even if it's just occasional emails or phone calls. I don't need forgiveness. I just don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering who you are. I thought about that for a long moment. Then, we can try, but slowly. And I'm going to hurt you sometimes. Push you away when things feel too close. Say things that are harsh because I'm still angry about everything that happened. If you can handle that, we can try. I can handle it. We shook hands again. Still formal, still awkward. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness. I wasn't capable of that yet. Might never be. But the beginning of something. A crack in the wall I'd built. Over the following months, my father and I exchanged emails every few weeks. Brief updates mostly. He'd ask about a project I'd mentioned. I'd tell him about a new resource center opening. Nothing deep, nothing that required me to be vulnerable, but consistent, present. Sebastian visited Austin in June, ostensibly for business, but really to see me. We had dinner, talked about his work at the fund, avoided the heaviest topics, but acknowledged they existed. You were always smarter than anyone gave you credit for, he said at one point. I knew that. I should have said something when Dad was writing you off. Should have pushed back. I'm sorry I didn't. Would it have mattered, I asked. Probably not. Dad's stubborn as hell. But at least you'd have known someone believed in you. I had someone believe in me, I said. Thinking of Chloe taking a chance on an unknown developer, of Madison seeing past my armor. Just not from within the family. Sebastian nodded, accepting that truth. My mother reached out in July, through my father's email. Her message was shorter, less analytical than his. Just, I think about you every day. I'm sorry for everything. I'd love to hear from you if you're willing. I didn't respond immediately. My relationship with my mother was more complicated than with my father. She'd been quieter in her rejection, but no less absolute. She'd sat in Harding's office and accepted his assessment without question. Let my father withdraw support without pushing back. But she'd also been the one who'd seemed most devastated when I left. Sebastian had mentioned that she'd tried to find me multiple times, that my disappearance had genuinely broken something in her. I wrote back 3 weeks later. I'm willing to talk, but I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was. You and Dad taught me that love is conditional, that I'm only valuable if I meet certain standards. That's a hard lesson to unlearn. I don't know if we can have a relationship that accounts for that, but we can try." Her response was immediate and raw. "I know I hurt you. I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I want to try, whatever that looks like." We started talking on the phone monthly, careful conversations about safe topics, her charity work, my company, neutral family news. Nothing about the past, not yet. Just the slow, painful process of learning to exist in each other's lives again. It wasn't healing. Not really. The damage was too deep, too fundamental. But it was something. A fragile connection that acknowledged the past without being completely destroyed by it. By the time I turned 32, Thornton Digital Solutions had grown into a genuine tech company with over 200 employees and annual revenue exceeding $100 million. My foundation had funded resource centers in 12 cities, providing educational support to over 10,000 kids. I'd built something I was genuinely proud of, not because it proved my family wrong, but because it mattered. Madison and I got married in a small ceremony at the Eastside Resource Center, surrounded by volunteers and kids we'd worked with and people who'd known us as we were, not as extensions of family legacy. My father and Sebastian attended, sitting in the back, not participating but present. My mother cried through the entire ceremony. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. We weren't a happy, functional family. Too much damage, too much history, but we were learning to coexist, to acknowledge what had been broken while building something new, something smaller and more careful but real. The real change came during a conversation with Madison about 6 months after the wedding. We were lying in bed, the Austin heat making the room thick and close despite the air conditioning. "Do you still think about Harding?" she asked suddenly. I was surprised by the question. "Sometimes. Not as much as I used to." "What do you think about?" "Whether destroying his career was worth it. Whether it actually fixed anything." "Did it?" I considered that seriously. It stopped him from hurting more students, made Whitlock accountable for its systems, but it didn't heal what he did to me, didn't make my family believe in me. Revenge doesn't work that way. "No," Madison agreed, "it doesn't. But it wasn't just revenge. You exposed a corrupt system, protected kids who would have been crushed the same way you were." "True, but I did it while broken myself. Used my grandmother's money to destroy someone, then spent a decade building success primarily to prove my family wrong. That's not healthy motivation." "Maybe not, but it led you here, to this company, this work, this life. Would you have built all of this if you just moved on?" "I don't know. Maybe I would have built something different, something less driven by opposition." "Would it have been better?" I thought about that for a long time. Would a version of me who'd forgiven my family early, who'd let go of the anger at Harding, who'd built a life from peace rather than defiance, would that person have created more impact? Maybe. Or maybe that person would have been softer, less driven, less obsessed, with creating pathways for kids who'd been written off. Maybe the damage was necessary. Maybe you couldn't fight certain systems without first experiencing their violence personally. "I don't know," I finally said, "but I know this. I spent 12 years proving my family wrong, building success that had nothing to do with them. And you were right, it was exhausting. Even when I was winning, I was still defined by their judgment, just in reverse. And now I'm trying to build something different. Success that's about impact rather than opposition. Relationships that aren't about proving anything. A life that's mine because I chose it, not because I was defending against something else." Madison was quiet for a moment. Then, "How's that going?" I laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded. "Slowly. I'm still learning how to trust without needing complete control, how to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm giving someone power to destroy me, how to accept that people can fail you and still deserve presence in your life. That's hard work, harder than building a company, harder than destroying Harding's career, but maybe more important. She rolled over to face me directly. I'm proud of you. Not for the company or the money or any of that. For choosing to do this hard work even though you could have just stayed in your fortress and been objectively successful. The fortress was lonely, I said quietly, and it wasn't actually protecting me from anything, just keeping me isolated. I know, but recognizing that and doing something about it are different things. She was right. Recognition was easy. Change was brutal. I'd spent 12 years learning to be invulnerable, building walls between myself and everyone who'd hurt me. Tearing those walls down, even partially, even slowly, required a different kind of courage than I'd needed to build my company. But I was trying, talking to my father monthly, working on forgiveness I might never fully achieve, but could at least acknowledge as a goal. Letting Madison see my weaknesses without armor. Training myself to measure success by impact and meaning, rather than by how much it would have surprised the people who'd written me off. It was progress. Slow, painful, incomplete progress, but progress nonetheless. On a random Thursday in October, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. Mr. Thornton, you probably don't remember me. I was in your AP history class at Whitlock in 2013 to 2014. My name is Peyton Franklin. I read the Business Journal article about your company and your foundation work. I wanted to reach out because you're part of the reason I'm writing this email as Dr. Franklin, instead of someone who gave up on education entirely. After I dropped Harding's class, I was ready to quit. Convinced I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't belong at Whitlock or anywhere else that expected rigorous intellectual work. But then the investigation happened. Someone had documented everything, the grading patterns, the recommendation discrepancies, the systematic way certain students got crushed while others got elevated. Seeing that evidence, knowing someone had cared enough to expose what was happening, gave me permission to stop believing Harding's assessment of me. I went to community college, then transferred to Berkeley, did a PhD in education policy. Now I work on accountability systems that prevent what happened to us from happening to other students. I don't know if you were involved in the investigation. The sources were anonymous. But I wanted to thank you anyway, for being there during that horrible year, for being another student who Harding tried to destroy, for surviving and building something meaningful. I hope this isn't too strange to receive. I just thought you should know that your success matters to more people than you probably realize. Peyton. I read the email 3 times, then I forwarded it to Madison with a simple message. I think this might be why. She called me immediately. "Oh, Adrian." I never told her, I said. Never told anyone I was the one who triggered the investigation. Let it be anonymous. Let it just be this thing that happened. Are you going to tell her now? I thought about that. About whether Peyton needed to know, whether it would change anything, about whether I needed the credit or the acknowledgement. No, I decided. Let her think it was just someone who cared. That's true enough. It's more than true enough, Madison said gently. It's exactly what it was. I wrote back to Peyton that evening. Dr. Franklin, I remember you very clearly. You were one of the smartest people in that class, and Harding's treatment of you was criminal. I'm glad you didn't let his assessment define you. I'm glad you're doing work that prevents other students from experiencing what we did. That matters more than you know. Congratulations on everything you've built. You earned it despite a system designed to stop you. That takes strength most people never have to develop. Adrian. Her response came an hour later. Thank you. That means a lot coming from someone who survived the same thing. If you're ever in the Berkeley area, I'd love to buy you coffee and talk about education accountability systems. I think you'd have valuable perspective. I smiled, typing back, I'd like that. 2 weeks later, I was in San Francisco for meetings with potential investors in one of my foundation's programs. I drove across the bay to Berkeley and met Peyton at a coffee shop near campus. She looked different from how I remembered. More confident, more settled in herself. But her eyes had the same sharp intelligence that I'd noticed in Harding's class. The same quality that had probably threatened him. It's strange seeing you after all these years, she said as we sat down. I've followed your company's growth. It's remarkable what you've built. You have a PhD from Berkeley and you're shaping education policy, I countered. That's equally remarkable. True, but I had to fight for every step, had to prove I belonged at every level. She paused. Do you ever wonder what we could have accomplished if we hadn't had to spend so much energy fighting just to be seen as capable? All the time, I admitted. I spent my entire 20s building success primarily to prove people wrong. It worked. I built something meaningful. But I also lost years to opposition mode. Years I could have spent building from a healthier place. Do you regret it? I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret the outcome. I looked at her directly. Can I tell you something? Of course. I was the one who compiled the evidence against Harding, hired a private investigator, documented everything, submitted it to the oversight boards. Peyton stared at me. That was you? I had resources most people don't. An inheritance from my grandmother. Time, money for a professional investigation. After what he did to me, to you, to so many others, I couldn't just walk away. Had to make sure he couldn't keep destroying students. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because it wasn't about credit. It was about stopping him. Making sure the system he'd built got dismantled before it could crush more people. Peyton was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick. That investigation saved my life. Literally, I was done. Ready to quit, accept that I was limited, stop reaching. But seeing that evidence, knowing someone had documented what was happening, it gave me permission to stop believing him. I'm glad, I said simply. No, you don't understand. She leaned forward. I've spent the last 8 years studying how systemic bias crushes students from marginalized backgrounds. How authority figures use their positions to destroy potential while maintaining plausible deniability. Every piece of research I've done, every policy recommendation I've made, it all traces back to understanding what Harding did and how he got away with it for so long. Your investigation didn't just end his career. It provided a roadmap for how to identify and dismantle these systems. I felt something shift in my chest. I'd thought of the investigation as revenge, as a way to stop Harding from hurting more students. But Peyton was describing something bigger, a catalyst for systemic change that went far beyond one corrupt teacher. I didn't know that, I said. How could you? You stayed anonymous. She smiled. But I'm telling you now, what you did mattered, not just for me, but for thousands of students who benefit from accountability systems built on evidence like what you compiled. We talked for another 2 hours, about her research, about Access Now and my foundation's work, about the specific mechanism systems used to crush potential while appearing meritocratic. Peyton had developed frameworks for identifying bias patterns that she was implementing in school districts across California. You should talk to my wife, I said eventually. Madison runs resource centers focused on exactly these populations. She'd benefit from your frameworks. I'd love that. I made the introduction via email that evening. Within a week, Madison and Peyton were planning a collaboration to implement accountability systems in resource center partner schools. Watching them work together over the following months, I realized something. I'd spent 12 years building in opposition to the people who'd hurt me. but the real impact came from building in support of the people who were doing the work that mattered. Destroying Harding's career had been necessary, but connecting Madison with Peyton, funding research on educational equity, creating platforms that made quality education accessible, that was how systemic change actually happened. Not through revenge, but through consistent, strategic investment in people and programs that created better pathways. At 33, I felt like I finally understood what Madison had been trying to tell me. Success built in opposition was exhausting and incomplete. Success built in collaboration, in support of meaningful work, was sustainable and genuinely impactful. It was also, paradoxically, harder. Revenge had been simple: identify target, compile evidence, destroy career. Building coalitions, funding long-term programs, supporting other people's leadership required patience and trust and the willingness to let go of control. But it mattered more. Created change that would outlast my lifetime. I was sitting in my office late one evening, reviewing foundation grant applications, when my phone rang. My father's number. We'd been talking regularly for over a year now, but he usually emailed rather than called. Something must have happened. "Dad," I answered. "Adrian, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Just working. What's up?" "I wanted to tell you something before you see it in the news. I'm stepping down from Thornton Capital, effective next month." I sat back in my chair, surprised. "You're retiring?" "Not exactly. I'm starting a foundation, education-focused. I've been watching what you've built with Access Now and your other programs. I want to do something similar. Use the resources I've accumulated to create pathways for kids who've been written off." I didn't know what to say. "I know this probably seems like I'm copying you," my father continued, "or trying to compete with what you've built, but it's not that. You showed me what meaningful work looks like. I spent 40 years optimizing for profit. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left optimizing for impact." That's good, Dad. I was hoping we could collaborate, not directly. I know our relationship isn't there yet, but maybe our foundations could partner on programs, pool resources for maximum impact. I thought about that carefully. Part of me wanted to keep my work completely separate from my family, maintain the independence I'd fought so hard to establish. But a larger part recognized that refusing collaboration would just be another form of opposition, another way of defining myself by what I was against rather than what I was for. "We can try," I said. "Start small, see how it works." "Thank you." There was genuine relief in his voice. "Adrian, I know I can't undo the damage I caused. Can't change the fact that you built your life despite me, rather than because of me. But I'm grateful you're giving me any chance at all to be part of what you're creating." "I'm not doing it for you," I said, but without heat. "I'm doing it because the work matters more than our history. If your foundation can help more kids, that's what's important." "I understand." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. Then I called Madison. "My father's starting an education foundation," I told her. "He wants to collaborate. How do you feel about that?" Conflicted. Part of me wants to keep everything separate, prove I don't need his involvement. But that's just opposition mode again, defining success by independence rather than impact. "So what are you going to do?" "Try. See if we can work together without it triggering all my defensive instincts. Let the work matter more than the history." "That's brave," Madison said softly. "It's terrifying," I corrected. "But maybe that means it's the right thing to do." Over the following year, our foundations did collaborate. Carefully, with clear boundaries and separate decision-making authority. But we pooled resources for a program providing college prep support to students from low-income backgrounds. Exactly the kind of systemic intervention that might have helped me, might have helped Peyton, might have prevented Harding's machine from destroying so many futures. The program launched in 15 cities simultaneously, serving over 5,000 students in its first year. My father and I presented it together at a national education conference, standing side by side and talking about the importance of creating pathways for students the system typically writes off. It was strange, deeply strange, but also right in ways I couldn't quite articulate. After the presentation, a journalist asked my father, "Your son built his company and foundation without your support. Do you regret not being part of that earlier work?" My father looked at me before answering. I nodded slightly, giving permission. "I have many regrets," he said, "but the biggest is not recognizing my son's potential when it mattered most. I wrote him off based on traditional metrics of achievement. I let someone else define what he was capable of. And by the time I realized how catastrophically wrong I was, he'd already built this incredible life without me. I can't change that history, but I'm grateful he's letting me be part of the work going forward." The journalist turned to me. "And you? Do you regret the years of separation?" I thought about that carefully. About 12 years of anger and isolation and building success primarily to prove people wrong. About the damage that had never fully healed, the trust that remained fractured, the relationships that would never be what they could have been if things had been different from the start. "I regret that the separation was necessary," I said finally. "But I don't regret building my own foundation first. I needed to know I could succeed on my own terms, without inherited advantages or family connections. That knowledge is worth what it cost to achieve." It was the most honest answer I could give. That night, Madison and I walked through downtown Austin, the city lights reflecting off the high-rises that had sprouted like weeds over the past decade. "You handled that question well," she said. "It's true, all of it. I do regret that things had to happen this way, but I don't regret who I became in the process. Even with all the damage, all the isolation, even with that, because isolation taught me to be self-sufficient. Damage taught me to build protective systems. Anger taught me to fight corruption rather than accept it. None of that is healthy in absolute terms, but it made me capable of doing work that matters." Madison was quiet for a moment. "Do you think you've forgiven them? Your father, your mother, all of it?" "No," I said honestly. "I don't know if I ever fully will. What they did changed me permanently, made trust almost impossible, turned vulnerability into danger. That's not something forgiveness can erase. But you're working with your father now, building programs together. Because the work matters more than my anger. Because refusing to collaborate would just be another form of opposition, and I'm tired of being defined by what I'm against." I looked at her. "I can work with him without forgiving him, can build something meaningful together while still carrying the weight of what he did. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." "That's very mature," Madison said with a slight smile. "It's very necessary," I corrected, "because otherwise I'd spend the rest of my life in that fortress you mentioned, safe, successful, completely alone. And I've learned that's not actually a victory. What is victory then?" I thought about that question, about Harding's destroyed career, about my company's success, about the thousands of kids Access Now had helped, about Peyton becoming Dr. Franklin and doing work that prevented other students from experiencing what we had, about my father stepping down from his company to focus on impact rather than profit. "I don't know if I believe in victory anymore," I said finally. "I believe in impact, in creating systems that work better than the ones that hurt us, in using whatever resources and skills I have to make opportunities accessible to people who've been written off. That's not victory, it's just work that matters. And the personal stuff, your family, your relationships, all the damage you're still carrying, that's work too. Different work, slower, harder, less quantifiable, but probably more important than anything else I'm doing." Madison took my hand. "I'm proud of you for doing both kinds of work, even though neither of them feels like winning. Winning is overrated, I said. Impact lasts longer. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about 17-year-old Adrian sitting in Harding's office being told he lacked cognitive architecture for rigorous intellectual work. Thought about 20-year-old Adrian compiling evidence to destroy a corrupt system. Thought about 33-year-old Adrian standing on a stage next to his father, presenting collaborative work neither of them could have done alone. None of it felt like a straight line, more like a spiral, circling back to old wounds, processing them differently each time, building something new from the same raw materials. I'd proven my family wrong 1,000 times over, built success they never expected, created impact that dwarfed their traditional metrics of achievement. But proving them wrong hadn't healed anything, hadn't made trust automatic or relationships simple or the damage disappear. What had started to heal things, slowly, incompletely but genuinely, was choosing to build in support of meaningful work rather than in opposition to people who'd hurt me. Letting impact matter more than vindication. Allowing collaboration even when it meant trusting people who'd failed me before. It wasn't a satisfying narrative. Wasn't the kind of story where the protagonist achieves complete victory and lives happily ever after. But it was real. And maybe I was beginning to understand that was enough. Because the kids going through Access Now's programs didn't care about my personal journey or my complicated relationship with my family. They cared that someone was creating pathways when everyone else had written them off. They cared that resources existed to support their potential, even when traditional systems said they didn't deserve them. That impact, concrete, measurable, life-changing, mattered more than any personal narrative of revenge or reconciliation. I'd spent 12 years learning that lesson the hard way, but I'd learned it. And I'd keep building on it for however long I was able. That was the real victory, I supposed. Not winning against specific people, but creating systems that worked better than the ones that had tried to destroy me. Not achieving perfect healing, but doing meaningful work despite carrying permanent scars. Not escaping the past, but building a future where fewer people experience the same damage. It wasn't enough to fix everything. But it was more than I'd thought possible when I was 17 and broken and convinced I was fundamentally limited. And maybe, just maybe, that was all anyone could reasonably accomplish, taking damage and transmuting it into something that created opportunities for others, taking anger and channeling it into accountability systems, taking isolation and transforming it into resources for connection. The work was never done. The healing was never complete. But the impact was real. And after 12 years of searching, I'd finally found something that felt like purpose rather than just opposition. That would have to be enough. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.